Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Independent Thought. I am your host, Desmond Price, and today I am joined by my panel for our second panel episode of the season. And so, for today's episode, we're going to be talking about a couple different topics. But before we break into what those topics will be, first, I want to introduce my panel. Making her first appearance on Independent Thought, her debut, Ashlyn Young. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And making his fourth appearance on Independent Thought, we are welcoming back to the show fresh faces, new ideas. How you doing today, sir?
Dude, I'm excited. I love being on these things. I love talking to people. I enjoy these conversations. I'm excited. I think I've gotten past the point where the debates I've been on, people are advocating for just bombing countries. So I think we're good here.
Yeah, I think we're past that as well. And so finally, we are having back on Lloyde Ogden, making his sixth appearance on Independent Thought. You are the person who's been on the show the third most now. How does it feel? Welcome back.
Makes me a veteran. Kind of feels kind of cool. No, it feels good. Again, I love it here. You're amazing. So yeah, I'll be here 17 times if I need to be. A little infinity loop. We got this.
A little loop there. All right. Well, thank you all for coming on to the show today. Let's just jump right into it. The first topic that I want to discuss is the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Obviously, this has been something that's been in the news relentlessly for the last few weeks here, and culminating with this past week where we finally withdrew completely from Afghanistan. But obviously, before that happened, and since the last time we talked about this in our previous panel, some more service members did die in Afghanistan during the withdrawal. Some Afghani civilians were killed in drone strikes in retaliation. And so I kind of want to just pick everyone's brain on this topic and kind of feel, see where everyone's feeling about this. Do we still all think that we should have left Afghanistan? And does Biden deserve blame for how the withdrawal took place? I want to start off with Lloyde. You are someone who served in the military, so I feel like it's appropriate to start with you first in this topic. Do you think that we should have left Afghanistan, and do you blame Biden for how the withdrawal took place?
Yeah, I think we should have left. I don't think we should have been there as long as we were. If you guys didn't know, it's the longest war in American history. It's longer than any other war we've had. Not the bloodiest war, but it's just like it's a super long war. People, sons were replacing their fathers overseas, and that's just weird, But not only that, but we were fighting an idea. We're fighting terror. We weren't even fighting like an actual force of people. We were just fighting an idea. And so that's kind of a losing battle already. So yeah, I think I was over in Afghanistan in like 2009, and it's as bad as you think it is. I mean, they have no competency, as you can clearly see, because they fell in like 2 weeks, with withdrawal. So yeah, like what are we supposed to do? If we were there 20 years and they fell in 2 weeks, there's nothing we can do. That was a losing battle. Any sort of withdrawal, I agree with. Now, do I think Biden handled it well? I don't know, man. I don't know why you couldn't get more equipment out of there, or why we couldn't have planned that a little better. That seems a little weird to me. I don't know the inner workings of, what's going on there right now, because I haven't been there in 10 years, but I do know that they left a lot of stuff, and it seems real sketch, and that's taxpayer money. And I'm, sort of a libertarian when it comes to spending tax money. And I just don't understand why you would give the Taliban, of all organizations, all of that stuff that we left. It doesn't make any sense to me. So yeah, I think that it could have 100% been handled better. I think Biden's lucky that it's so early in his presidency, because if this was something that happened close to election time, I think he would have clearly lost the election. This is a pretty big stain on his record and probably his legacy, So hopefully, not hopefully, but hopefully for him, I suppose, this gets washed away in the next 2 years, because if it doesn't, it's a bad look.
All right. Well, I do appreciate your take on this. I want to throw this over to Ashlyn next. What are your thoughts on what we saw in Afghanistan? Do you think that we should have stayed there for a little bit longer? Some people were saying, especially in the military community, that we should have just stayed there a little bit longer, or we could have, gone to this other airport and kind of held that down for a little while. Do you think that Biden did everything he could to get the troops out of there correctly? So what are your stances on this?
I agree with Lloyde, and I agree with, the vast majority of our country who says, yes, it was time. Like, this has been too long. Like you said, Lloyde, we weren't making any progress. We were doing the same things for the last 20 years and, expecting something to change, which is just crazy. I have not served in the military, and also I don't know the conversations that are being had behind the scenes. So can we say 100% Biden should have done things differently? I don't think that we can, because we don't know everything that's going on over there. I was listening to a podcast earlier where a man who's been involved in reporting on the Afghanistan war for the last 20 years, he said, we have been learning new things about the country itself the entire time that we've been there. He was like, 10 years into that, we're still learning new things about their culture and just the way that they do things. And we can't pretend like we went in there with, their best interest in mind, because we had no idea even who they as a people were and what was going to be good for them. And, we still don't know. And yeah, I don't think that there's much that us, general civilians can say that I don't even feel like I have a right to say, yes, this was right, or no, it wasn't, because again, we don't know all the details. But was it time to get out? Absolutely. Can we debate all day about whether or not we should have, taken out the citizens who helped us over the last 20 years so that they're not in danger? Yeah, we can talk about who should have come first all day long, but was it time? Yes. Was the date already set from the Trump administration? Yes, we were already far past that. And, I've heard a lot of speculation on, well, we couldn't have known that the Taliban was going to do what it did. We couldn't have known that we were going to lose, 13 of our members of our military in the last couple days. I think that the last 6 months of the Taliban kind of regaining their strength over there pointed us towards the fact that we could have expected some retaliation, but we'll never know what it could have been the other way. And at this point, it's just, how do we move forward and make sure that all the citizens there who did help us, and the US citizens who are still over there, how do we get them out safely? And I think that's kind of the point that we're at right now.
Hey, I appreciate that. And Fresh Faces, New Ideas, I want you to round us off here. What are your thoughts on our Afghanistan withdrawal? And do you blame Biden whatsoever for basically what we've seen in the last week or so of the withdrawal?
Okay, first, we absolutely should have gotten out. Second, when we're talking about this, we have to put this into context. To just say this is on Joe Biden puts a massive ignorance on the population. That implies that we have not, we're ignoring the last 20 years of history in that country. It's implying we've ignored the last year of what the Trump administration was doing. So just to say, oh, yes, this is on Joe Biden is just nonsense. Now, did the Biden administration make mistakes? Absolutely. I would love to have Lloyd. I don't know where you were stationed when you were over there. This is a conversation I had with somebody who was allegedly stationed over there and could talk about Bagram. And I've had information about it that I would like to actually discuss with somebody about, a Bagram and whether or not that could have worked. But there's a lot of information that's going on that is just so short-sighted. I think a lot of the idea of this being an absolute failure comes from the idea that America kind of lost. And then it comes from that first weekend where there was the scenes of the people running in front of the planes, the people falling off the planes. And that weekend where Clarissa Ward, she's like, we haven't done anything in 8 hours. And they got 4,000 people out in the first week. To put this all as a failure is both inaccurate, and it doesn't understand what is the complexity of this issue. This isn't a, Joe Biden did this, so this happened. This is a long-standing thing that will require time to be unraveled. And I feel like a lot of the people who are saying, oh, this is a failure or success, are not accurately discussing what's happened there.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to go ahead and just say a few words myself, and then we're just going to open up for open discussion here on this topic. From my understanding, the reason why we went into Afghanistan, and I want to say this because I've seen people who, in my own social media frame, have said that, Biden made this atrocious mistake, or that we shouldn't have left, or so on and so forth. So I kind of want to address that a little bit. My understanding for going into Afghanistan was to go after the people who were responsible for 9/11, so Al Qaeda, and for going after Osama bin Laden specifically. Now, from what I could gather, we were able to effectively squash Al Qaeda and drive them out of Afghanistan. And we also killed Osama bin Laden in, what was it, like 2011, 2010? And so the mission was for the original reason for going into Afghanistan was accomplished within 10 years. And so at the very least, we should have been out of there 10 years ago. Now, since then, the argument for staying in there has been nation building, which is something that I thought that most people were very much against. But I'm now finding out that a lot of people seem to be considering that we should be nation building, even though the same people who are calling for it right now were also against us being overseas a year ago when President Trump was saying that we should get out of Afghanistan. So it feels like a lot of people who were, I guess, attacking Joe Biden for, continuing the withdrawal just seem to be just playing this like hyper partisanship thing where they just wanted to attack him because he was a Democrat in charge when he was literally doing the exact same thing that the Trump administration said they were going to do a year ago. The only difference is Trump administration claimed it was conditions based, which was just, a talking point for saying that they were never really going to leave, But, with all that being said, I do think that we should have left. I don't think we should have been there in the first place, truthfully speaking. We spent over $1 trillion in that country. That money could have been better spent here in our country, because like you were saying, Lloyd, we were fighting an idea. You're never going to beat an idea. It's just not really going to work that way. I mean, because the idea was that we're trying to squash terrorism, trying to squash insurgency. But I'm wondering how many people did we create who might, hate America in the process in the last 20 years, because of what we've done, because of random drone strikes, because of how many civilians were killed over the last 20 years while we were fighting terrorism. So it feels, like an endeavor that we should have never have been involved with for this long, if maybe ever, as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, with the withdrawal part, I feel as though Biden definitely could have done better. I mean, that should be, I think that's obvious. I don't know how anyone could argue on his behalf, truthfully speaking. But I guess all in all, I'm glad that we are out of the country, and I just don't understand people who think that we should have stayed. But now I want to open it up to everyone else if you want to ask each other questions. Fresh Faces said you wanted to ask Lloyd some specific questions.
Yeah, I did about Bagram, but before I wanted to put some other things based on what you said. The two of the other things that have to be talked about when we refer to people who are saying like they're backseat driving this, hindsight's 2020, we have to also understand that, like, regardless of like what you say now, we have the military's estimate was, like, our intelligence estimate was that the Afghan government would still be in power like 30 days from now. And I think that had a lot to do with how things ended up so poorly, because we just misread it so badly that their collapse probably slowed down or sped up a lot of things that they were attempting to do. So if you're going to argue for a different type of strategy, you have to do it under those circumstances. Understanding that you still expected the military to be in charge is one of those circumstances. And another one is this idea of like, oh, we have to keep Americans there, or keep American soldiers till we get every American out, or we have to push more American soldiers in until we take Kabul, or we send them out so we had the numbers to take both Bagram and the embassy. The people who are arguing that, are you also then going, like, for example, Kevin McCarthy, would you also then blame Joe Biden should they stay there and more American casualties rack up because of our extended presence there? You have to weigh these things, because as far as I can tell, the people who are arguing for those type of things, we need to stay in America, we need to just bomb the hell out of them until we get every American out, they don't seem to like the question obviously is, well, what happens if more Americans die? Are you willing to take that responsibility? And I think that's part of what happened when Joe Biden pulled out, because it's not like he's just like, oh, fuck it, we're out. There's plenty of reporting to show that we are still working with the Taliban to get the people out. And they're like, oh, well, you can't argue with terrorists. Well, they're kind of the government now. We don't have anyone else to talk to. If we just ignore them, that puts more Americans in danger. That would be a dereliction of our duty, because whatever's going on in the Panjshir Valley, they're not in charge of the country. So you have to like actually think about this. It's really nice to say, oh, Joe Biden left Americans there and he left $80 billion of weapons, which just factually isn't correct. The $80 billion is like fundamentally wrong. it's, you know, there's a lot to this that it just requires. This is my problem with a lot of politics is you just have to ask one follow-up question and it's never asked.
True. Lloyd, Ashlyn, have either of you heard people saying that we should stay in Afghanistan?
Nope, I don't think I have.
Yeah, I feel like the overwhelming majority of people agree that we shouldn't be there. And I think it's funny, you know, the argument of like, oh, we need to send more people in until we get everyone out. It's just prolonging it. And, you know, it's like there's always going to be this underlying threat from the Taliban to the US. I mean, nobody's going to forget and think, oh, you know, everything is good now and we've changed everything over there. You know, I don't know if anybody listened. I'm sure everybody listened after the 13 US military members were killed. Biden's speech was almost identical to the speech that George W. Bush gave after the 9/11 attacks. I mean, the rhetoric of, you know, we'll hunt you down, we'll make you pay. We're just continuing the cycle of, you know, you make a threat against us and we're going to come back harder towards you. And that didn't get us anywhere in the last 20 years. And I don't even see what the point in making those threats is right now, because that's just going to put us right back where we started. And the idea of nation building is just ironic because nobody cared about Syrian refugees back in 2016. And let's not pretend like anybody actually has differing thoughts at this point. It's funny that right now, polls that are being taken, it's like 70% of Americans are in favor of having a large amount of Afghan refugees in the country, which I think is great. I am also in favor, but what a staggering difference from 2016 when, you know, nobody wanted Syrian refugees here. And so I think that everyone is going to follow, either they're going to follow the big person in charge or they're going to point fingers and, you know, say, oh, somebody else could have done it better. But, you know, the fact of the matter is there's going to be a humanitarian crisis, whether it's in Afghanistan or somewhere else. And that's the unfortunate fact about the world that we live in. But nation building, I mean, I just...
It's a frustrating thought.
Yeah.
Can I say something on that too?
Yeah, go ahead.
The people we have nation building is the Department of Defense, who generally breaks nations. Like this is not an original thought in any way, shape, or form. I literally am stealing this directly from Bo, the Fifth Column, who I love watching. I think he's brilliant. There is no central like overall agency to fix a nation that's been broken like this. If there's an overall pandemic, we have the World Health Organization. If there's like financial collapse, we have the IMF. We have no central agency that's designed to figure out how to put a nation back together. We just hope that the military can figure it out or one shape or form. And ultimately it more or less always ends up in a disaster. And this is something we need to realize and start to fix. Just because the UN is there doesn't mean that the UN is going to be effective. It's a thought process that we have to change. A lot of thoughts have to change because look, we put the people in charge of breaking the country, try to put it back together, and it clearly didn't work. And it hasn't worked, you know, pretty much anywhere.
You know, I do want to ask Lloyd one question, specifically since you did, you know, serve over in Afghanistan. I've heard other people who served over there, you know, like just from, I think it was like a Vox interview that I saw recently where they were interviewing 3 service members who had served over in Afghanistan as well. And they said that they were just feeling a tremendous amount of anger because they were unsure like what they were even fighting for. And they just were kind of unsure of even where to direct that anger, but they were directing it at Joe Biden because he's the current president and he's withdrawing everyone, so on and so forth. Do you understand that sentiment? And where do you think people, like, if they are angry, where do you think they should be angry? Is it at like a specific person or at every president who like sent us in and kept us in Afghanistan? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I can't speak for anyone else. And I also want to throw a caveat here real quick before we get any, you know, too crazy. You know, serving in Afghanistan doesn't give me some like free pass to talk about it, right? I personally believe that it doesn't take a scholar or a veteran to know, you know, like right or wrong when it comes to like at least this kind of global affair. I think it's pretty obvious. Like we all get it. War on terror makes sense. No one is more qualified outside of like diplomats and stuff. Like there's very few people I think that are truly qualified to talk about this stuff. And so like I don't think that puts me or any veteran or anyone else in any special category, right? So don't hold your thoughts or whatever. But I think as far as like I won't speak for any other veteran, right? Like I'm glad. I'm sad because like a large part of my identity growing up was that I did serve. It was I went to my first deployment was Afghanistan. I got to my unit and I went to Afghanistan almost immediately. It was fun. It was a good learning experience. I am who I am today because of that. But like, bro, it's time to go. Like let's get out of there. Like it's pretty obvious that it was kind of silly. This was 10 years ago. I was in there 2009 to 12, 11, 10 years ago. And it's like it's time to go. It's just there's no reason to be there. And I think anyone who served maybe then my time and before like 2003 to 2000 whatever, like that made sense. But then after that, like you said, after we killed Osama bin Laden, like what are we doing there still? So I think like yeah, it feels good to me to be out of there. It sucks how I want to respond to something you said earlier, Fresh Faces. You said like we let the pull out. Bro, we had there's months, years, 21 years to plan this. Like, I don't know why we couldn't have done better pulling out than we did, because like, I feel like as the commander in chief or as any, head of agency, you had months, you knew you won the election a long time ago. You knew that Trump had signed a deal to get us out of there, talk to the Taliban. Like we had months to plan this. And I feel like we could have done a lot better than we did. Also, to elaborate on your point, just one last thing is like you said, like who else? We're working with the Taliban to get people out of there. To me, that sounds like we're like if I just say work with North Korea, like who else we talk to? It doesn't make it a good option though. Like the Taliban's still the Taliban, even if they are the government. I feel like they're a terrorist organization who is the government. Like we're dealing with terrorists still, whether you call them the government or not. So I think that we could have done better. They hate women. Like I don't want to like speak in generalizations or whatever, but like they've been anti-women, they've been anti-freedom. Like we're dealing with them, so we could have done a lot of things better. We have NATO allies that we could have helped. There's so many things we could have done better, in my opinion, and especially with the amount of time we had to do it. So I don't think it's an excuse to say, oh man, who else are we supposed to deal with? Not them. I don't know. Get out before we have to deal with them. Do something else. Figure it out. I don't know. That's just it's kind of a weird, I wouldn't call it an excuse, but it's weird to hear that. Like, who else we deal with? Figure something else out. We're the USA, man. Come on.
Yeah, I think that's going to be unfortunate that the last word on this subject. Fresh Faces, sorry to cut you off there. I think we're going to move on to our next topic because we could probably go further into depth. There's so many different layers to talk about. We could talk about how the Taliban abuses people in the country of Afghanistan. We could talk about all the different factors that led into why we were there, why we were staying, so on and so forth. So I am by no means saying that this conversation is done, but since we do have a couple more conversations to talk about for this episode, we are going to transition for right now. So the next topic that I do want to speak on is the idea of whether or not social media platforms should ban hate speech. Now, this is something that I've seen floated on Twitter as well as on Instagram, different people saying that, over the last year and a half during the pandemic, we have seen Instagram and Twitter and Facebook basically flag anything that had the word COVID or vaccine in it and just have like a little like disclaimer underneath that. And so the question then was proposed, should the tech companies be going a step further and doing something similar or maybe even beyond that? And just since they do have the ability to analyze all speech on their platform, whether it's in a video or in text, should they be putting either disclaimers or outright banning hate speech on social media platforms? Now, there is a variety of different ways that we could go with this conversation. So I'm actually going to start off with Ashlyn this time. So do you think that these giant tech companies should be banning hate speech? Yes, no? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think that this is hard and why this has been a debate for a really long time now. Do I want to see KKK members and the Proud Boys touting their ideas on social media? Absolutely not. So from that side of my, from my personal perspective, would I love to see all of the things that I don't like flagged and removed? Yeah, I would. That would be great. But you know, I think it goes beyond that, and everyone who has covered this in the last, 10 years since social media has become this huge entity, is who is deciding who they're flagging. I mean, personally, a lot of people that I follow that are activists on the left side have been flagged and removed. There's argument from the conservative side that says, oh, well, they're taking down all our stuff, and these social media platforms are all left leaning, and so these are the ideas that they're promoting. And that's just not true. Number one, people are being flagged and banned and removed on both sides, and this is a huge thing. And I could be probably swayed either way on this, because I think what it comes down to is, what systems are we putting in place to actually flag and remove these? Is it, I mean, I don't know. How do you choose what words you're going to have your algorithm pull out to ban people? We have too many people involved in social media to have an efficient and effective policing method of it. I think it's almost too big to be able to put a really effective process in the works. Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough thing.
Yeah, no, definitely it is. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to pose this question to the panel itself, because it does feel like a very conflicting question. So I'm going to now pass this on to Fresh Faces New Ideas. Where do you stand on these tech platforms, and whether or not they should be policing language more on their, on their platforms themselves?
Okay. Yeah, very quickly, I just want to say to both Lloyd and Ashlyn, if you guys ever want to come onto my show, I can reach out to you after this, and we can discuss anything else in further. Especially Lloyd, I know that like the Afghanistan stuff, we definitely have a much larger conversation. As for this, so there are hate speech laws. They exist in Europe. I have not spent time looking into them. I was literally Googling trying to figure out where they were, because I knew they existed. I just forgot where. So these are not things that I have totally looked into. But I agree with Ashley. It's the issue of, what are we considering hate speech? I remember Twitter came out, I think it was after January 6th or around that time, saying that if they started banning like neo-Nazis and stuff, they would hit a lot of conservative politicians. And that is something that they had to worry about. A lot of they were purging people after January 6th. And remember, the whole CPAC was, oh, I lost 40,000 Twitter followers. Well, yeah, they were probably Nazis. I mean, look, we can agree that certain ideologies are bad. But that it really just comes down to how we're wording this. Oh, this is probably something I'd have to spend more time looking into. Should we, decry hate speech? And yeah, obviously, there's obviously ideologies that one can figure is wrong, but then it goes both ways. Like, for example, I don't know how many of you saw the Project Veritas thing that was going around about the Antifa teacher in California. They're basically saying, well, he's Antifa and that's bad. But the opposite is fascism. So where you they're clearly making a boogeyman out of something where the opposite side should be the problem. So it all comes down to who's presenting it, and what are the actual mechanisms for oversight, and what is considered the bad speech.
Right. And so I think one of the things that prompted me to ask this question particularly was, as some of you know, I am constantly doing poll questions on my Instagram account. And one of my recent questions last month was this exact question. And when I asked this question, 61% of the people who responded said yes. And so, which, then again led me to think oh, well, maybe we should be having a broader discussion on this topic. And so now I'm going to bring in Lloyd. Where do you fall in on this question? Do you think the tech platform should be banning hate speech?
Yeah, I think the answer is pretty indefinitely yes. I think not only that, I'll go a step further. Actually, I think this is maybe a new opinion, but I think they should ban more than hate speech. I think they should just ban. I think that there should be so much more regulation on tech platforms, given what their clout, right? I'm a libertarian at heart, right? But the idea that what's right and what feels good are different, right? We know that because of how fast misinformation spreads on Facebook. That's a problem, right? It's a big issue. It's a bad thing. There's really no good to it. Russia was able to pretty easily influence, our election by just going to Facebook, right? So I think that we really should put a much harder lockdown on social media. Not only that, you mentioned earlier, I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was Ashlyn or if it was Fresh, but you said that like because they would ban politicians, well, that you're sort of admitting that like they already are special rules that need to be followed, and we should regulate that. I also disagree with you, Ashlyn, earlier when you said that. What do we do? They can like if you talk about you know orange juice, you'll get an ad for orange juice in like 2 seconds. Like they're clearly they have the ability, and it just depends on where the money's at. They have the ability to make changes, and they can do things that are revolutionary. You know, like the advertisement, targeted advertising, listening to you, looking at what you type, where you're at, your location, GPSing you. They have all this crazy technology they can do. They go to space. We have all this crazy satellites. Like this idea that they can't figure it out is a lie. They figured it all out. They know everything. So they could definitely find rules. It just depends on where the money is, right? Obviously, capitalism really at the end of the day is what it is. But yeah, I think there's no reason not to regulate them. Way stricter, including hate speech, to include just misinformation in general. I think they should give them some kind of modified version of publisher rights, where they can just unpublish you right away, like just boom, you're gone. I don't know why we wouldn't be able to do that. It sounds silly because they're tech giants. They're huge companies that have massive clout and massive abilities, and they've shown that. Yes, we can regulate them way more than we do, easily, not question.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in with my 2 cents on this issue now. I am in the place where if it was kind of like how they're doing it right now with coronavirus, where they had like a little like I guess a little like link at the bottom saying, like this would be categorized as hate speech, so on and so forth. I don't think I'd have an issue with that, just so that, like basically the tech platforms are, making aware that what they're seeing is wrong in some way, shape, or form if they had something along those lines. But outright banning it, I'm just not exactly a real big fan of, because I don't know where that slope ends. Like what exactly becomes hate speech after a while? Because that's such a broad category. I guess it depends on how it's defined. Because what exactly falls under the umbrella of hate speech would really just tell me whether or not I was for or against it. But, I think when you just loosely define it, as I assumed it probably would be, if we just called it just hate speech, I think eventually that can just be used against anyone and kind of just silencing people's ability to have, to have discussions on whatever they want to have discussions on, which I'm ultimately opposed to. I do think freedom of speech should be protected, but at the same time, I do think that people should have consequences for the speech that they have. And so I think if you have, maybe something I wouldn't be opposed to would be, if you categorically say like hateful, nasty things and you've been flagged several times, maybe your account gets suspended temporarily. Maybe after a few times of getting suspended, you get banned permanently. But I do think that there should be a little bit of, I guess, a little bit more moderation on the tech platform's point, but I wouldn't want to see a full like authoritarian kind of like banning of certain words and practices outright. But now I kind of want to open it up for everyone to have their discussion on this. Ashlyn, yes, I think that you want to respond. Go ahead and go ahead first.
Well, I have a couple of things. So number one, like Lloyd said, capitalism is what's ruling this. We as a nation, the talk of like, well, we should regulate them more and we should do this. Well, who is we? If we're asking the government to do this, then we're asking them to remove our right for free speech. And again, we all agree that, certain things are hateful and shouldn't be allowed, but that is the right of living in this country. And it comes down to the money that these platforms are making, and nobody wants to actually take a stand for the most part. And could these tech platforms do this? Yeah, of course they could. They're already doing a form of it right now, and they could do as much as they want. They can put whatever they want into their user agreements, but they don't want to do that because they don't want to piss off whichever side they're afraid they're going to piss off. And that's really, that's what it comes down to. It's everybody has things that they don't want to see. And, Twitter has already banned people. Should they have banned Trump? Of course, absolutely. But they can ban whoever they want. Instagram takes people down all the time and, locks them out of their account for a certain number of days because they think that they've said things that they shouldn't be saying. So it's like it's already happening, and it could happen on whatever scale they want it to. They just have to make that decision. There's a lot of conversation about, well, these companies are monopolies, and so the government should have something to say about the way that they're practicing, because they're not going up against anybody. They're in conflict with antitrust laws. There's no competition. So, Parler popped up out of nowhere because the right side felt like they were being quieted. I listened to a podcast actually this morning where the creator of Parler was talking about why he created it. And interestingly enough, he didn't sound as right-leaning as I thought he would. But he said, the way we do it on our side is we don't ban anyone, but we let kind of a jury of their peers decide, if they should be removed or not. And the commentator said, well, isn't your platform kind of an echo chamber for one group of people? And so they're probably all going to side the exact same way. So I think that that's another kind of interesting thing about social media is, my social media leans towards the way that I think, and that's just the way that it is. I listen to people of opposing views all the time because I live in Montana and my family lives in the South. So I'm surrounded by opposing opinions, but they can do whatever they want, and the social media outlets are choosing not to. And if our government decides to make them do it, First Amendment goes bye-bye. But could they if they wanted to? Yeah, absolutely. We could make some big cultural changes if making money wasn't so important.
Well, also there's other things so like the thing with Trump being banned, the always response is, well, I think it's the mullahs, the ruler of Iran, or the Grand Ayatollah, whatever he is called on the Taliban, is still on Twitter. And my argument for that is simple. They either treat world leaders all differently than the rest of us, where they don't fall under any TOS issues, or they treat them all equally. Like, you can't make special, concessions. They made a bunch for Trump. They had to create multiple new ways of dealing with his tweets in order to deal with them. So as long as you're, being even-handed across the board, that's fine. If we want to worry about these tech platforms being, privatized, obviously antitrust is a good one, but then we should have them be clarified as news agencies, so there's stricter rules on how they function, because they basically function as news agencies. The percentage of people who get their information from Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or wherever is massive, and Facebook knows it has these issues. They understand that their own algorithms radicalize people 65% of the time. You end up looking on what is a cure for COVID, and now you're curing them. It spirals. But yeah, this is a lot of it comes down to who is making these rules. And Lloyd, when you said, we know that this is a problem, I have a problem that one party is consistently tied to what would be considered hateful Nazi rhetoric. And I think they should be removed for that. But the problem is, these are the ones who, and let's be real about the reason they're not going to is because the Republican Party, as much as they bitch about big tech, is not actually going to do anything. They made multiple threats, but they're not actually doing, because they're the ones who take the money. They're the ones who, I don't remember if you remember this when the first time they were doing the voter suppression bill in Texas, Mitch McConnell came out and said, hey, listen, corporations should, they shouldn't say anything about politics, but they should still give us money. They just should shut the fuck up. It's they're the party that, they talk big to their base and then they don't do anything. And as for things like Parler and Gab, the issue with those is if you don't have some type of TOS, you end up with these hellholes, because the people who go to those sites, they want to just own the libs. They want to, post Nazi memes. They want to, be misogynistic. There's a reason those sites all collapse into this hateful black hole every single time. It's because that's the type of people who are there. And if there's no libs there for them to own, they just collapse on themselves. So, it's fun for these things, the Parlers, the Gabs, the Frank speech, if that's even a thing, or whatever Mike Lindell was doing, they all have the same pattern. So it's it ultimately, for hate speech, it comes down to, we've all pretty much said, is who's making the decisions. They can do this. The question is, what are the guidelines that we're giving them?
Can I round this off?
Yeah, definitely.
I want to respond to kind of everybody here, right? Like, I agree with that, like almost to the T. Like, it's everything you said. I just want to echo. That's good stuff here. But like, you said the First Amendment thing, Ashlyn. I don't know if that's true, because like I think, when newspapers were a thing, like they had to get published. You had to go to a newspaper. It had to agree with you. It would edit your viewpoint to a respectable, whatever they consider respectable, and then they would publish it. And then if they got sued, the newspaper would get sued, not you, because they took the responsibility of having you on there, right? And that's kind of the same thing with social media. It's like, obviously it's way bigger than any newspaper has ever been. And so like, there's no way that Facebook can agree or hard publish everything that goes on the site. But like, we got to make rules for it. We got to do something, because like what is, it's clearly not working, right? I don't think it's about, I think it's not working. What misinformation is getting through. QAnon should not exist. That stuff should not even exist. That didn't exist, at least to this level, when newspapers were a thing, because you just couldn't go anywhere you want and get any instant ingredients without censorship at all. It's crazy how QAnon is a thing. If you were to describe QAnon to me 20 years ago, I would laugh at you, but it's a real thing, and a lot of people fall for it. It's not working. We have to do something. So yeah, I don't think the answer is like, should we? I think it's like, how do we ban hate speech? How do we stop misinformation? Because it's becoming like a pandemic. It's becoming so dangerous that it's hurting our democracy. To me, and like, it's one of the secret reasons we're in this mess we're in. Like, no one thinks about it, but we need to do something. Like, tech should step in and do something about it. The government should step in. Like, that's the role of the government. Like, yes, we are giving some of the freedom up, of course, to private companies are losing freedom, but like, it's hurting us. So we have to do something. That is what government does. So I don't know if the First Amendment really applies here, because it's not, you don't have the right to hurt other people. And I think that's what's happening. We're clearly down this path of danger, where people like Trump are winning elections. QAnon exists. It's crazy. So I don't know.
Can I just put something in about the QAnon stuff? So sure. I think, yes, it is true that QAnon should exist just because of the absolute absurdity of what it is. But it's a special kind of conspiracy. Let's be clear about this. Conspiracy theories have existed forever. Part of the reason that QAnon is able to sprawl out, and it can, get the flat earthers, it can get the anti-vaxxers, it can get the anti-government types, is because of, the amorphous version of how this is. But a lot of that is not like when you refer to 20 years ago, I mean, that's just a product of the internet and being able to be in contact with all these people. Like, if we didn't have the ability to just gather mass groups of people who had interesting thoughts together, things like that wouldn't spread. So that's part of why the internet is both a blessing and a curse. So yeah, 20 years ago, something like QAnon could exist. It would be a lot smaller and it would be a lot less damaging. But because we have access, like everybody has access to it, it is easier for it to spread. And that's why the growth of QAnon exploded during the lockdowns, because everyone was home and they had nothing to do but like, well, why does the government hate me? Like, that's how it grows.
So shouldn't we ban it then? Shouldn't we regulate?
Should we ban QAnon or ban the internet?
Shouldn't we regulate the internet way heavier then?
Oh yeah, but look, like, you're never going to get rid of all conspiracy theories. Like, there's some of them that are harmless. Like, flat earthers are generally harmless. The anti-moon landing people are generally harmless. The anti-vaxxers are definitely harmful, and if you are I know we'll get to this later, but if you are any type of medical professional, like the entire frontline for American doctors, they should all be arrested for the threat to public health that they go, because they're putting faces, like professional faces, to a movement that is literally getting people killed.
Right. And so I guess I'll kind of like jump in here to finish this off. I think implementation is everything, because how we go down this path will be very crucial to everything else. Because once you start banning certain parts of speech on these platforms, which have become public utilities, whether or not they want to admit that they are a public utility, once you start going down that path, the question is what's next? Because once you start going down the hate speech path, do you start banning anti-nation speech? If you're saying things that are against the countries, do you start regulating other types of speech? And so I don't think there's anything wrong with regulating hate speech, but I think it's very important about how exactly it's done and what the scope is. what exactly falls underneath the umbrella. And I think as long as we have very defined terms and it's not this open, vague thing, then I think that we can all kind of, more or less come to a true understanding of whether or not it is truly a good idea, a bad idea, worth doing, worth pursuing, so on and so forth. But I want to transition to our final topic of the panel. And it was kind of a late edition. We weren't exactly going to cover this today, but given what happened in Texas this week, I feel like that was a very important topic to cover now. So the state of Texas signed into law a heartbeat bill, I think is what they're calling it, where they are banning abortions after 6 weeks, which to my understanding would effectively nullify around 85% of abortions that do happen in our country. Now, the Supreme Court, I guess I forget exactly what the procedure was called, but they didn't exactly rule on its constitutionality, but rather they just decided not to block it. So, and they voted on that in a 5-4 fashion. So now that what allows that to happen is that this Texas bill will become law effectively. And now there are millions of women in Texas who will no longer have access to this healthcare. And so I wanted to get everyone's thoughts on this bill, whether or not they think it's just, whether or not they think that the Supreme Court made the right decision here. And so I do want to acknowledge that 3 of us on the panel here are men, so not the best representative to talk about this. But I do want to start off this conversation with Ashlyn. What are your thoughts on what happened in Texas? And do you think that the Supreme Court should have voted differently?
Can I ask to go last? Because I would love to know if there are any specific things that
you can 100% go last.
I would love to go last.
Fresh faces, new ideas. You have not gone first yet, so you're going first this time.
Okay. So anyone who happened to hop into my last stream, I actually covered abortion at the end. And let's just talk about this law as it is. This law is first unconstitutional as fuck. You cannot ban abortions before 22 weeks. That's what Roe said. It is unconstitutional. Secondly, the reason that the Supreme Court ruled the way it did was first because this has been a decades-long project to overturn Roe. That is a not relevant point. They already had this teed up for when they were looking at the Mississippi ban in a couple months. So this is not a new thing. The idea of how they did this law. So basically, what this law says is the government doesn't enforce this. The 4 of us technically enforce this law. If we know of any woman in Texas who got an abortion after 6 weeks, we can sue her. We can sue the abortion provider. We can sue the guy who drove her there. We can sue her friend who she had a conversation with. We can sue if she set up a GoFundMe page. We sue that one. We can sue if she went to a rape doctor about this. That if I raped her and I know she got an abortion, my friend can sue her for that abortion. I can't do that. That's written in the law. The person who directly raped her can't do that, but somebody else can sue her for that. This law is unbelievably terrible, and it basically sets up an entire system of vigilante justice, and I hope every single blue state is immediately drafting a variation of this particular law about either anti-mask or guns or whatever thing they want to go after to make the Supreme Court rule that this type of law is unconstitutional, because this law is so bad. We're not even talking like I'm sorry, I feel bad for these women. It's like unbelievable that this happened directly after we just had Republicans going, but what about the women in Afghanistan? And then obviously the follow-up to this is, if your argument is now, okay, abortion is banned, I hope the next bill you're passing is an enhancement in prenatal care, an enhancement in child welfare, an enhancement for the minimum wage so that people can then afford to take off, an enhancement in pre-K care. Unless you're doing all these things, it's just to punish women. And there should be let's be clear about this as well. There should absolutely be some type of responsibility for the men, because women don't just spontaneously get pregnant. There's a movie about that on Netflix where they spontaneously got pregnant and then ultimately men got wiped out. But that's not how this works. A man is required for this to happen. So by not having any responsibility on the man as well, this bill is just designed to go after women. It's like literally the absurdity of this bill is just insane. But this is what happens when you have a Supreme Court tilted this way. And this is not relevant to, but all those people who are saying, fuck you, Bernie bros, because Hillary would have stopped this. You have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. You literally don't understand politics if that is your understanding of what happened here.
Okay, so
Spicy.
so
Well, I'm a Bernie bro, so like that's they're blaming me for this. I voted for Hillary. She lost because she was a bad candidate, but that's not the point.
right. So I appreciate that. Fresh faces, new ideas. I want to add a little bit of extra context into this because it's one thing to talk about the fact that Texas is the second biggest state in the country as far as population is concerned, that there are close to 30 million people that fall, within this state's boundaries. And I'm sure, approximately like 14 to 15 million women that we're talking about in this state. But it's not just women in Texas who are going to be affected by this, because effectively what I think is going to happen here is going to be a domino effect that's going to happen in so many other states. Because I'm looking at an article that Axios put out recently, and they said that just this year, North Dakota, Iowa, Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia all attempted to implement restrictive bans, and they were declared unconstitutional, as well as Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, Ohio had laws they tried to pass that were temporarily blocked. And Idaho and Louisiana have what they're calling trigger point bills, which can be essentially put into effect if other legislation comes in first. And so there is a huge wave of other dominoes that could fall, if this Texas bill stands up, which the Supreme Court refused to deem constitutional or unconstitutional. So with all that being said, this isn't really just about Texas. So Lloyd, now that I'm bringing this over to you now, what are your thoughts on this bill? And did the Supreme Court, I guess, bungle this, or is this part of their plan? Like, are they eventually going to rule Roe unconstitutional here in a few months?
I think the Supreme Court absolutely did funnel this. I think Fresh Faces, you're exactly right. Like there's two arguments here. There's a constitutional law-based argument, and there's the argument about abortion, what you agree with abortion. Like, I'm not going to focus on the abortion part of it. I personally think abortion should be legal. It's not my choice. I just don't give a shit what you do with your body as a female. I don't. It's just not my problem, right? But to the law argument, though, it is absolutely this law is so bad, right? So you pretty much nailed all my points. It's just a bad law. I have no idea how. Again, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I just don't know how it got, like, how they didn't rule it unconstitutional. There's so many laws just like it that have been ruled unconstitutional or delayed or whatever. I have no idea how this got through. So to me, yeah, this feels like a clear Supreme Court failure on my part. And this kind of shows you, like, hey, man, your vote does matter. So when the next president comes up, you better know that the person is pro-choice or not, because this to me is absolutely ridiculous that the Supreme Court didn't just shoot this down right away. That being said, right, I'm actually strangely optimistic, I guess, right? Like you said, it's the dominoes you're talking about. I think that there's another set of dominoes that is going to happen. I think that the country as a whole, we're getting more pro-choice. We're getting less evangelical. We're getting less, I think we're getting more progressive in weird ways. So I think that attempts like this are just going to show the new generation of voters, younger people. I think eventually we'll have more and more voice. Maybe they won't take over like we're hoping they will, but more voice. And then at that point, this is going to convince people, like, the way of thinking that has led to this is flawed. And so we will get more progressive ideas. And not that I'm some screaming progressive, I think I'm more progressive, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, he was just saying he's a progressive.
Oh yeah. Not that I'm more libertarian in a lot of ways, but like, I think that this will lead to more people realizing how stupid these kind of laws are. When you actually look at the law, like I said, like he said, it is absolutely stupid. So yeah, that's my optimism about it, is that this will lead to a more progressive future. If not just for this kind of thing, that's a win in my book. Even if this law, I don't think it lasts long, and I think this leads to the opposite result of what the people who pass it are hoping for.
All right. Well, I usually go last on each one of these topics, but Ashlyn requested to go last this time, so I will put in my take really quickly here. I am completely for, body autonomy. So I am, pro-choice completely. And it is undeniable to me that there is nothing really about this bill other than trying to control people's bodies, kind of to control women's bodies. Because as you were pointing out, Fresh Faces, there isn't also some like push alongside of this to make sure that contraceptive is going to be free, or that they're going to be enhancing sex education within the state of Texas, or that they're going to be going out and making sure that women have more access to birth control, like IUDs, that they're going to be, going out of their way to make sure that men, I guess, like, are going to be responsible for childcare, like, I guess, like at the point of 6 weeks. Like, do they start paying child support immediately? That's the question I want to ask next. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me that you would put this into place. And I know that for a long time there has been this push, like in the conservative sphere, as far as wanting to ban abortions. But honestly, maybe I just haven't been seeing enough conservatives have this conversation, but it always feels like it's just men having these conversations, about how they need to ban abortion. But I do not see anything positive that can come out of this, because the fact of the matter is that banning abortion in this way doesn't actually ever truly stop people from having abortions. It just stops people from having safe abortions. You've heard that from all over the place, but it's 100% true. It's going to affect poor women the most, people who don't have the means to leave the state of Texas in order to go somewhere else to get these said operations, because people who are wealthy are still going to be able to go ahead and leave Texas and go have their operations done elsewhere or go get care elsewhere. But the poor women of that state are not going to have the ability to do so. I had a woman reach out to me on Twitter this week who worked in an abortion clinic outside of Galveston, Texas. She was absolutely outraged by this, because she was sharing with me some of her stories about helping women in those clinics over the years and all the different like things that they had to go through, like in that current environment. Now they just made it tremendously worse. This is an absolute stain, and I hope that Greg Abbott gets ousted out of that governorship in 2022, because this law is an absolute travesty in my opinion. But now, Ashlyn, please join us and tell us what your feelings are on this topic.
Perfect. Well, I feel grateful to be, sitting here with 3 men who, have their heads on straight, because there's a lot of them who don't. But, if we're talking about the law specifically, and, we're not here to have a discussion about whether abortion is right or wrong. But the law itself is just asinine and hysterical, because, fresh faces, like you said, this is not about, the government having an opinion on what you do with your body. This is about turning all of the people against each other. Realistically, is there any way that this is actually going to work? I mean, you've got all of the people up on a soapbox who feel like, they're going to use all of these resources to report women and report all the people who help them get an abortion. But, you've got this huge movement of people on the other side now who say, well, we're just going to flood these databases with ridiculous information. I mean, nobody is actually going to be able to get useful information to prosecute people. And I think it's hysterical that the people who put these laws into place don't recognize that they're going to affect them too. I think the biggest problem that has always been had with abortion is that nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about, that they had one done or why they had one done, because it's always been a subject that was wrong. Even if you have an abortion to save your own fucking life, we don't want to talk about it because it feels like, we did something wrong. I think, that comes down to what women are taught that they're here for. And when they do anything in opposition of that, there's like this thought that you're just inherently a horrible person. But the fact of the matter is there are so many abortions that legally happen each year. I mean, there's like, I think back in 2018 or 19 was the last time they actually took the data, and there were like 700,000 abortions that were documented that year. And that's not, Plan B morning after pill. That's actually someone who's going in and having an abortion done. That's 12 people per, 1,000 women. That's crazy. That's a huge amount of people who are getting abortions every year. We need to stop pretending like it's not happening and like it's wrong, and just acknowledge that it's happening, number one, and understand why it's happening. I don't know if you guys have seen the video from years ago where a politician is speaking with a reporter on his, campaign platform, and she asks if he's pro-choice, and he says, of course not, abortion's wrong, nobody should ever have one. And she said, well, why do you think a woman would choose to have an abortion? And he just blank faces, and he goes, well, I don't know. I'm not a woman, so I guess I haven't ever thought about it. And it's like,
Surprise.
are you kidding? Are you kidding me? Like, this is ridiculous. And yeah, aside from being a war on women, like, this is a war on impoverished women, because just like you said, Texas is massive. It's not as simple as saying, oh, well, you know, drive 20 minutes to this other place, you can have it done. You can't do that. That's not possible. And, you know, the fact that there are a lot of abortion banning laws, they always allow exceptions for rape, incest, you know, if there's life-threatening condition to the mother or the fetus, like, there are always exceptions. You can't come out right now and say that a father can rape his 11-year-old daughter and, you know, she's probably going to die during childbirth, but she has to go through with it. Nothing about pro-life is pro-life, it's pro-birth, and it's not about saving lives. We're not saving any lives by pushing more children into poverty, pushing more children into abusive situations, and pushing women into financial, mental, and physical detriment just to be like, oh, well, we, you know, didn't harm a non-fully formed fetus. Like, it's insane. I agree with all of you, and I agree with you, Lloyd. I think that the amount of, like, people that are overwhelmingly in opposition to this are just coming in and gonna say, no, we're not going to deal with this. This is ridiculous. This has been such a long fight. And here we are with the same people who are saying, you know, my body, my choice. I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm not going to get a vaccine, but I'm going to tell a woman that, you know, she can't do what she wants with her body. It's, you know, it's just hysterical. Like,
It's insanity.
It's madness.
Yeah.
I think that's the perfect word to throw into this, which is why I didn't even think it was relevant to, you know, ask the question whether or not abortion, you know, like, is ethical or not, which I was just talking about just the law in principle, because I don't understand how we're still having that conversation, but maybe that's just me and my bias coming out. But now I want to just open this up for everyone to jump in, because, you know, one of the takes that I heard was, you know, well, maybe instead of banning abortions, maybe we should just be asking all men to get reversible vasectomies, you know, because maybe that might be the simpler answer here.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's very obvious that this is a thing to control women. Because let's see, all right, so if you're banning abortions, then I imagine that the number of children in Texas in childcare or in foster homes is going to shrink dramatically as all these pro-life people go adopt them. Also, Desmond, to put back on the non-women, well, there's a couple of them. Marjorie Taylor Greene, when she's not spouting Nazi stuff for
Or Jewish
COVID,
space lasers.
or space lasers, is
Yeah.
very anti-abortion. This is something she says. She says it's murdering millions of people. It's the worst thing we've ever done. This has gone so far to both her and Lauren Boebert both voted against the reauthorization of a bone marrow transplant, giving them money, because her argument was there's nothing in this that has language stopping abortion. This is a real thing. You can look this up. She actually voted against. They both voted against this. I think Laura Boebert voted against it for a different, but this was Marjorie Taylor Greene's direct reason. She's like, this has nothing to do with abortion. Oh yeah, Boebert did it because of its government saying. The problem is they're too stupid to figure out what's going on.
Can I just say something to that really quickly here before you go on? I think politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Laura Boebert, is that how you pronounce her last name?
Yeah.
I think she's out of Colorado. I don't know why we take these people seriously. Like, we all know that they're like a walking, like, comment section, right? They're just walking trolls. They're not really out there trying to, like, actually implement real policy. They're just talking shit, right? Like, they're not actually, like, truly believing in anything that they actually say. I mean, do people actually believe them when they speak?
No,
Yes.
The things she says, she believes. Marjorie Taylor Greene 100% believes everything she says. That woman is a lunatic. There's two things. One, the reason we have to pay attention to them is because the base loves them. Marjorie Taylor Greene is the number one fundraiser in the Congress. In Congress, she's the number one fundraiser. Now, on to Lauren Boebert. There is some good news. Apparently, during the redistricting of Colorado, her district became significantly bluer, so there's a good chance she's going to lose anyway. On top of the fact that she's a lunatic and has no idea about anything. So that is funny in itself. But look, like, we can go on about this. This is a nonsense fight that they've been pushing for, and hopefully the backlash is we get, you know, the Gen Z kids are, writing all the scripts that's crashing all the websites. Hopefully, I think it's like 70% of the country wants abortion in some form or another. Hopefully they're going to backlash against this. And I think, look, if it takes a little while for the Supreme Court to overturn this or somebody to write a law that ultimately gets this overturned, I hope we see some like really obvious cases of them fucking with this. Like, because part of the only way for them to do this is they have to stand outside of these abortion clinics, because otherwise it violates HIPAA laws for them to charge these people. And the other thing we're going to see is there's going to be a lot of frivolous lawsuits, because for me to bring the lawsuit for this, there's no detriment to me. I don't have to pay like I don't get in trouble for bringing just a random ass lawsuit. I just have to pay whatever the lawyer fees are. And if I somehow find a judge who helps me win this, well, now I'm $10,000 richer and I can go do this. Like the incentive to this is just not, there's like no good way. You can't logically look at this and talk about this in good faith. And Lloyd, last thing to what you said, the Supreme Court did not fail. The Supreme Court, as it's currently instructed, 100% did what their job was. They all wanted to overturn Roe. That's why they picked the Missouri case. The problem was, then this is why John Roberts voted in the dissent, is because he didn't want to do it in this case. Because even he's like, come on, guys, we can't allow this. Like we all want to get rid of Roe, but like not this way. So the lunatics on the right were totally happy, and this was their goal, and they've been saying it basically since Roe existed. And this is just a bad law, and hopefully maybe this will get them to pay a price for being just lunatics.
Right. I want to just slightly like shift the conversation a little bit towards the Supreme Court right now, because that is something that has also kind of come up with this conversation. Is people, I think was AOC immediately was saying that we should, be packing the court. I think other people also said that we should be packing the court. Does the panel, and anyone can answer this question, but do any of you think that packing the Supreme Court is the answer to this problem of what we're seeing right now with these abortion laws?
I can go first, but I'm very long-winded, but so I think yes, absolutely. It is. Look, I think it's 5 of the current judges on the Supreme Court have been put there by presidents who did not win the popular vote of the country. We are stuck with a conservative majority for at least my lifetime, and I think I'm the youngest person on this panel. We're stuck with it. Hopefully Breyer retires like right now, because I don't know if Larry Elder is going to win in California, so he might somehow be able to replace Dianne Feinstein. So then we lose the Senate, and then we're all fucked. He needs to retire so that we can replace him. So in like 8 years, when there's a Republican and he dies, we're not in the same position as RBG. Like this is not we have to expand the Supreme Court just on the sense that it would make it fairer so that it actually represents the will of the people. And this is not unprecedented. This happens again. This has been done without even passing laws. For people who don't forget, remember the Supreme Court had 8 members for like the last year of the Obama administration, simply because Mitch McConnell was like, no, fuck you, I'm not sitting anybody. Yeah, Merrick Garland's just going to sit there. So this is not unprecedented. There's historical history for this. We can figure out how to change it later, but the Supreme Court does not represent the will of the people, and it is just an arbitrary body at this point that can decide to overturn pretty much any precedent that they want. They don't care about precedent. They're just too much of the court is radicalized. We're not going to be able to get any abortion rights. They're sure as shit not going to allow us to pass any voters' rights, because John Roberts basically decides anytime there's a voter right, I'm going to shoot it with the gun. We're like hanging on to Obamacare by a thread. There's like the existence of this democracy relies on us changing how the Supreme Court works.
You know what? Let me chime in here. I think you're right. I don't know about back in the court. I think the issue to me is that they have lifetime appointments. Like, a 30, 40-year-old gets on there, they're on there for 40 years. That's insane. That's absurd. Like
that is insane.
Like the history, like society changes so much in that time frame, right? That's a huge problem. And so they're dying on the Supreme Court. People that are almost about to die are making choices on like healthcare. Like what do you know about healthcare? You're in the grave. Like I'm not trying to sound like Ruth Bader, like, bro, you shouldn't be dying on the Supreme Court. That's crazy. Like it's crazy that she had cancer or whatever, and like that's insane. Like you should be retired. Go somewhere else, man. Like, you do not belong on the Supreme Court in the condition she was in. And same with the other guy, Scalia. Like, they should not be dying from court. So that to me, that's the problem, is that we have 80-year-old people on there who would rather die than realize that they don't know what they're talking about anymore. And also their lifetime appointments. Those are crazy. I know we've never had term limits on there. The Constitution doesn't really go over that. It says like something about like, it doesn't really mention lifetime appointments or anything other than lifetime appointments. But maybe we should put that in there, because it's crazy that they do 40 years. It should be 20 years. I don't even think 20 years is crazy. That sounds crazy to me as well, because they are as powerful as the president, essentially, right? They have something close to what the president has, and the president only does 8 years, So I don't know. And they're not voted for. Like, the argument against term limits for Congress is that they're voted for. You could, every 2 years to 6 years, you have to vote for them, and they can lose at any time. That's not the case for Supreme Court. So why don't they have term limits? It's crazy. Like, get out of here,
Ashlyn, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think it's funny that, I shared something on my Instagram a couple of months ago that was like, it's ironic that, we most often don't employ people that are, 70 and older. They are expected to be retired. We don't think that they can do jobs adequately. They're not relevant enough, but they are the majority of people that are running our country. So I agree, there should definitely be term limits, the number of years that is. I'm not going to put something to, because I would have no basis, but yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, you shouldn't be sitting on the Supreme Court and able to say, oh yes, I once had a horse and buggy, when we're going all electric now. Like, just like you said, what do you know? Like this, let's move on. We would have a completely different country, the completely different set of laws, if the demographic that made up the majority was actually the one making the rules. And, it's like, the old white men in charge are just kind of grasping at straws right now. And, we see this consistently. Anytime there is progress in one direction, it's like this huge upheaval of trying to hold on to what we once knew. I think that's exactly what's happening with the abortion law right now, is, you are seeing an uprising of women who are standing up for themselves and people that are supporting them. And, those on the conservative right are just really trying to hang on as hard as they can and say, well, okay, everyone else, it's your job to get them in trouble now. And I think we all agree that's not going to work. But yeah, term limits for sure. As far as how many justices we need, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that, but
I'm just going to say that absolutely we need term limits on the Supreme Court. Absolutely. There's no reason against it. There's no reason for term limits. There's no reason that we should have term limits for the president and not for members of Congress or for the Supreme Court itself. Having a lifetime appointment is absolute insanity to me, because if it's supposed to be a co-equal branch of the government, there's no reason to argue that the president should be termed out after 8 years or after 2 terms, and that the legislative branch is indefinite. And, as long as they just keep getting voted in, or that the judicial branch, it just has like one appointment and they're in forever. I mean, and apparently that's codified in the Constitution under Article 3, which is what I had to just look up while we were talking about this. It just says that Supreme Court justices hold their office during good behavior, which I guess has been translated into they hold their office for lifetime. So that is in the Constitution. So it would take a tremendous act to overturn that, but it absolutely should be. There is no reason why someone holding our highest office in the judicial branch should be in power for 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, it's absolutely madness to me. Now, should we pack the court? I don't know that solves the problem. I really don't. And Fresh Faces, I know that you said that you absolutely think that we should. I don't know that it solves the problem, because if Joe Biden adds 4 or 5 justices to the Supreme Court during his administration, what's to stop the next Republican president from doing the same? And then from the next Democrat from doing the same again, and then again, and then again, right? So I just don't know that really ever solves the problem. It seems like it just puts a Band-Aid on a gash. Like, you're not actually solving the problem by adding more justices, or just temporarily doing what we probably shouldn't be doing, which is radicalizing the court more. if we were going to focus all of our political capital somewhere, I would want it into finding a way to putting limits on these justices, because 30, 40 years in a court is absolutely absurd to me. But
Can I
please
just
respond.
push back on it?
Yeah.
So look, I'm fine with term limits. I think the reason we need to pack the court is just to rebalance it. If we tie the expansion to term limits, I'm fine with that. But we cannot do something now and just kind of wait it out unless the term limits are going to be
Retroactive,
where it would already apply to those, and we're basically reseating everyone but like Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, depending on how long you're putting it on the court. Like, then it's still going to be the same problem unless we expand it. Like, we have to expand it just to even it out and to tilt it back into the correct order to balance it, and then we can worry about term limits. I do understand the idea of expanding the court can ultimately end up with, I think it's like Turkey has like 100 people in their court. Like, it could ultimately cause some type of kangaroo court. But to just, I think to balance it, it needs to happen, because if we just add term limits and we don't make them, retroactive, it's going to cause more problems. I think it's the best solution, because the following thing is, by expanding the court to allow us to see these people, we can set up some more safeguards so that when we shrink the court again, it allows us, like, the expanding the court would allow us to do more voting right protections, to try to deal with some of the corporate capture of our government. Like, there are things that we cannot do with this current court that would require rebalancing.
Okay. Well, hey, I appreciate everyone's, feedback on this, their opinions on these discussions. We are going to wrap up this episode, though, so I want to give everyone a final chance to kind of plug themselves and tell everyone where they can find them online, if they so choose to. So first, I want to go ahead and open up to Fresh Faces New Ideas. Where can everyone find you, outside of the occasional appearance on these debate panels?
Well, if you had more debate panels and you want to bring me out, I'm not going to argue there. But the answer is, you can find me pretty much anywhere under Fresh Faces New Ideas. Twitch.tv/Fresh Faces New Ideas. YouTube, Fresh Faces New Ideas. I don't update as much as I should on that. Twitter @Faces Ideas. If you go to my Twitter, it has access to my Discord, my Twitch, my YouTube. I think it is my Instagram too, but I only use Instagram simply for podcasts. To put those out. But yeah, Fresh Faces New Ideas. I stream pretty much every day of the week from at 1 p.m. EST. That might change as job stuff changes, but I will talk to pretty much anybody about anything. So if you're willing to come on, this is an open invitation to anybody and any of your other guests who listen to this in the future. Reach out to me and I'll set up a time with you. I would love to have a conversation with people. I'm very long-winded, as you can see, but that's where you find me.
All right. And Lloyd, welcome back to the podcast world. Where can everyone find you at for your eventual return to the podcasting community?
Yes, when I finally do, right? My name, LLOYDE, it's just Lloyd. That's the same on Twitch. It's on YouTube. It's on Facebook. My podcast that I was doing was under the guise of it's called Lip Service Podcast. That's probably going to change, but if I do return, I want to kind of simplify it all to my name, because that's just what it is. But a lot easier that way, But look for Lloyd. That's the same name on all social media platforms. That's my name on Twitch. That's my gamer name now. I've been able to secure. Luckily, not many people in the world have an E on the end of their name like I do, so I've been able to make that my tag and everything. So in most places, just look for Lloyd with an E on the end of it. If not, Lloyde Ogden, you'll find me. I'm right there. So,
all right. And Ashlyn, do you want people to find you when this is all said and done?
Well, I'm the only one on this panel who doesn't have a podcast. So if you found me on Instagram, which is the only social media that I currently have, it wouldn't be very interesting to you. Just, pictures of my dogs and stuff like that. So, you can't really find me anywhere, but maybe out on the street, the old school way.
All right. Not every panelist wants to be found. That is the takeaway here. If you are listening to this episode and you did enjoy this conversation, go ahead and share it on social media, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. If you're on Twitter, go ahead and just share this episode. Give us some feedback. Let us know what you thought of the episode. I want to thank all of my panelists for coming on today. Really do appreciate it. Be on the lookout for a bonus episode with these panelists. We'll be having future conversations about whether or not Children should be required to wear masks in school this upcoming year, as well as whether or not healthcare workers should be required to take the vaccine. There will be further